The reckoning on Crimson Creek. The truck idled, its tires crunching on the gravel, like a predator claiming its territory. Beautiful land out here, Deke Thorne drawled, his eyes sweeping across the fields of the Vale property. Real quiet, real private. Angela Thorne didn't flinch. It's not for sale. 2 days later, they returned. Marcus was gone. Angela was taken. A crude threat was nailed to their door. They didn't know he was a former Special Forces operative. They didn't know what they'd started. They unknowingly unleashed a force that would dismantle their group, piece by piece, and when it was over, there'd be no headlines. Only silence and consequences. The sun was sinking low, casting a deep golden hue over the rows of vegetables and fruit trees that stretched out from the Thorne property like a living tapestry. A gentle breeze carried the scent of damp earth and tomato vines, rustling through the crops in lazy waves, as though the land itself were breathing. Angela Thorne stood at the edge of the field, sleeves rolled up and streaked with soil, arms straining as she hoisted another crate of produce onto the wooden flatbed hitched to the ATV. The fading warmth of the day settled on her skin, and despite the work, she allowed herself a brief moment to pause and admire what she and her husband had built with their own hands. A short distance away, Marcus moved with deliberate focus, inspecting the irrigation line that curved along the eastern boundary of their property. He knelt by the junction valve, fingers tightening the metal with the kind of care that came from years of precision. Not the kind you learn on a farm, but the kind you never forgot from another life. Though his face was calm, there was something measured in every movement, as if he were always listening to something others couldn't hear. He didn't glance up often, but when he did, it was with a trained sweep of a man who still mapped exits out of habit. Inside the house earlier that morning, Angela had found another envelope tucked under the front door. The seal was clean, but the name on the letterhead was familiar. Southern Development Group. Another offer from a real estate company that had been circling them like vultures for months. She had tossed it onto the table with a sharp sigh. Marcus didn't say much, just opened the drawer beneath the window and quietly slid the envelope in beside the others. Each offer was more aggressive than the last, and each one had ended up right there, filed next to a business card that read, Harmony Land Holdings, moving the South forward. Angela didn't like how quickly things were shifting in Crimson Creek. She'd grown up here, seen farmland paved over, neighbors pushed out, families pressured into selling what their grandparents had died owning. Lately, the calls had grown more frequent, the letters more insistent. Marcus said very little, but Angela knew him well enough to see the tension in the way his jaw set whenever her voice carried that edge of worry. He didn't scare easily, but that didn't mean he wasn't preparing. As the last shadows of day stretched long across the field, a sound interrupted the quiet rhythm of their evening. Gravel crunched beneath tires, and both Angela and Marcus turned to see a pickup truck rolling down their long dirt path, stirring up dust that hung in the air like smoke. The vehicle came to a slow stop just outside the fence line, its body battered and sun-faded. The kind of truck that had seen a lifetime of bad miles. From the cab stepped 3 men, all dressed in a sort of casual grime that suggested they weren't here for a social call. Deke Thorne led the group, a thin, leathery man in his late 40s with mirrored sunglasses and a long stride that spoke of entitlement. Behind him came Brock Jensen, broader and younger, chewing on a toothpick and scanning the property like he already owned it. The third man hung back, Kyle Miller, young, pale, and visibly uncertain, his eyes shifting between the others like he wasn't sure why he was even there. Deke offered a slow, exaggerated wave as he approached the fence, the kind of gesture meant to disarm but not quite sincere. "Evening," he called out, voice as casual as spilled beer. Marcus straightened from the irrigation line, wiping his hands on a cloth without urgency. "Yo, looking for someone?" he asked, keeping his tone polite but flat. Deke smiled. "Nah, just heard some things about this place. Word is it's on the market. Figured we'd come see for ourselves. Beautiful land out here, real quiet, real private." Angela moved to Marcus's side, folding her arms across her chest. "It's not for sale," she said plainly. Deke raised his eyebrows, feigning surprise. "That's so, huh? Must be a misunderstanding. Fellas down at the county office said something different. Sounded like there's already paperwork in motion. A development agreement, maybe? One of them handshake deals the city likes to push through when they know what's best for the area. It's not for sale, Marcus repeated, voice steady and lower now. Brock spat on the ground near the truck, leaning against the hood like he had nowhere else to be. Maybe you ain't heard, but this land's already spoken for, he said, glancing at Angela like she was part property in question. Best thing y'all could do is take that check and move on back to wherever. Marcus stepped forward then, not fast, not loud, but in a way that made the space between them feel suddenly smaller. His eyes locked onto Brock's with focus that drained the blood right out of the younger man's face. There was no threat in his words, no raised voice, only a presence quiet and heavy, like a storm building pressure behind silence. Deke raised a hand to break the tension. We ain't looking for trouble, just making offers. Some folks take M, some don't, but everyone's got a price. That's just the world we live in. Marcus didn't move. Then go look for someone else. Angela's voice cut in, sharp and clear. You came up our road uninvited. You leave the same way. Dake's smile thinned. Shame to see good land go to waste out here. Things tend to happen when folks hold out too long. Fires. Accidents. Real shame. Marcus took another step forward. This is the last time you'll be standing here talking. Brock opened his mouth. Something nasty loaded on his tongue, but Deke slapped the side of the truck. That's enough, he said firmly, motioning them back. We'll be seeing you. The truck kicked up dust as it reversed and turned, the cloud hanging long in the orange light. Marcus didn't watch them go. He turned to check the fence instead, fingers brushing along the wiring, slow and deliberate. Angela stayed beside him, arms still crossed, eyes locked on the horizon. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew the same thing. They weren't done. Not even close. 2 days after the unwanted visit, the morning began like most others on the farm. Quiet, industrious, and full of the kind of peace that only people who had known violence could truly appreciate. Marcus had left early, well before sunrise, with the truck bed loaded and strapped down. The local co-op expected the weekly delivery before 9 a.m., and he preferred to make the drive while the roads were still empty. Angela watched him pull away from the porch, his figure outlined by the fading red glow of the taillights as they disappeared down the gravel path. She had insisted on staying back this time, citing the long list of chores that had stacked up, repairs to the greenhouse panels, fresh hay to lay down in the barn, and the crates of potatoes still waiting to be sorted and stored before the next rain. Marcus had nodded, no argument. She was more than capable, and neither of them had expected trouble to return so soon. By mid-morning, the sun had begun to climb past the tree lean, its heat shimmering off the metal roof of the shed where Angela now worked, arms deep in the day's labor. A wheelbarrow rested half-filled with feed sacks and spare tools, while hum of cicadas underscored the silence that blanketed the land. She had just finished res-tacking a row of seed trays when a faint shimmer caught her eye from across the field. Something just beyond a tree lean with rows of corn dipped into a thicket. A subtle flicker, a reflection of glass, maybe. She blinked, shook the sweat from her brow, and thought little of it until a second glint came, too steady to be accidental. Brock Jensen sat beneath the cover of low brush, his elbows resting on a raised knee. Binoculars pressed his eyes. The lenses adjusted smoothly as he tracked her movements across the property. From his position, the house was half obscured by a rusted trailer and tool shed, but he could see enough. One hand stayed on the phone in his lap, thumb moving lazily across the screen as he sent updates to Deke. She's alone. Been outside for over an hour. Still no sign of the husband. Moving now. By the time Angela wheeled the barrow around to the west gate, the truck had already begun its slow approach. She didn't hear it first, over the buzz of insects and the low rumble of her own effort, but when the tires hit the gravel, crunching in a steady rhythm, she paused, straightened, and wiped her palms on the front of her jeans. Same truck, same dull, rust-bitten body, same plume of dust rising behind them as they rolled to a stop, this time not even bothering to stay by the fence. The tires settled close enough to the barn door that Angela felt her throat tighten. The driver's side door opened, and Kyle climbed out first, flashing what he probably thought was a harmless smile. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, holding up one hand like a peace offering. "Didn't mean to scare you. Just figured we'd try again, you know." Be neighborly. Angela didn't move. He's not here, she said, watching their eyes for the smallest twitch. Brock stepped around from the passenger side. We ain't looking for him. Angela kept her voice firm. I told y'all before, this land's not for sale. Don't need visitors. Kyle looked sheepish. He nodded slowly, glanced back at the truck. Yeah, I understand. Just, it's hot out here. Could I maybe get a little water before we head out? Angela hesitated. It was a simple request, harmless on the surface, but something in her gut shifted, an unease that crept like a cold shadow down her spine. She turned a gesture toward the pump by the barn. It's right over there. Help yourself. As she started to turn back toward the wheelbarrow, her gaze caught a sudden blur of movement in her peripheral vision. Another door slammed shut. Brock was already moving. So was Deke. They had waited in the truck bed, crouched low and hidden behind a tarp, just out of sight. She spun just as Deke crossed the distance with practiced stride, one hand raised not in peace, but in command. Don't fight it, he warned. Won't help you. Angela took a half step back, eyes wide, body twisting toward the open field, but she never got the chance to run. Brock grabbed her arm hard, yanking her off balance. She kicked, catching him square in the shin, and let out a scream that tore into the still air like a blade. Kyle flinched, half lunging forward to help, then hesitating as Angela's elbow slammed into Brock's stomach. She wasn't small, and she wasn't passive. Her nails found skin, her knee struck bone, but it wasn't enough. Deke caught her hair from behind, wrenched her back, and with the force of 3 men, they wrestled her into the open rear door of the truck. Her legs kicked the frame. Her voice carried across the field. A boot scraped her ribs as they forced her in. The door slammed shut, sealing the noise away in an instant. By the time the dust had settled and the taillights disappeared beyond the gate, the yard was silent again. One overturned crate lay on its side, tomatoes crushed and leaking into the dirt. The only witness to what had just been stolen. Marcus wouldn't return for another 40 minutes. When he did, the truck was gone. The yard was too quiet, and Angela was no longer there. The gravel shifted under the tires as Marcus pulled into the driveway, the truck's engine settling into a low idle as he rolled to a stop beside the barn. The sun had begun to lean west, casting long shadows across the yard and gilding the rooftop in soft copper light. He tapped the dashboard once, then cut the engine, letting the silence reclaim the air around him. For a moment, it felt like any other day, but something was off. He noticed it in the stillness. Normally, by the time he returned, Angela would be on the porch, barefoot, maybe sipping something cold while waiting for him to unload. She'd tease him for forgetting to bring back her list of hardware store odds and ends, then insist on helping anyway. But today, there was no movement, no sound of the screen door swinging open, no figure waving from the top step. The porch was empty. He climbed down from the truck and walked toward the house, his boots crunching across the gravel. As he neared the steps, he glanced toward the crates stacked beside the shed. One of them had tipped, contents scattered haphazardly across the ground. A rake lay on its side nearby. The handle cracked as if it had been dropped too quickly. The wheelbarrow was tilted in the dirt, halfway loaded, abandoned mid-task. His pace slowed. Angela never left the job half done. At the porch, he reached for the door and paused. There, nestled between 2 boards near the top step, was her phone. The screen was dark but intact, resting just slightly off the welcome mat, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. Marcus crouched down, slowly picked it up, and turned it over in his hand. No cracks, no obvious damage, but it was unlocked, open to the camera app, as if she'd been trying to record something or take a picture when it slipped from her fingers. He stood up, carefully scanning the horizon, the tree line, the barn. His heart was not racing. Not yet, but something inside him, the part that always listened, always watched, had started counting details. Silence. Tools dropped mid-task. Her phone on the porch. No note left on the counter. No sound from the house. He opened the door. Inside, the air was cool and still. The kitchen was just as he left it that morning. Coffee pot still half full, 2 mugs in the sink, a dish towel slung over the chair. But the back door, the one near the greenhouse exit, stood slightly ajar, letting in a faint draft. Then he saw it. Taped to the wood near the handle, written in permanent marker on the back of an old envelope were the words, "Sell or she dies." He stared at the message for several seconds. His mind didn't panic. It narrowed, tightened. He stepped back from the door, closed it gently, and locked it. Then he walked the pantry. With one hand, he moved aside a shelf of canned tomatoes and pulled open a narrow wood panel hidden behind it. The hinges creaked softly, revealing a recessed compartment that didn't belong in a farmhouse. Inside, sealed in vacuum-tight plastic and metal cases, was another life. He pulled out the largest container first, placing it on the table. Then came a smaller one, flatter, with a thick rubber seal. Finally, he lifted a hard shell case on the very back and snapped the latches open. The contents were arranged with ruthless precision. A compact, collapsible assault rifle fitted with suppressor, a black sat phone wrapped in cloth, encrypted drives labeled only with codes, 2 maps, one to county, the other a broader radius marked in red circles, and a laminated ID badge so worn it had begun to curl the edges. M. Vance, Tier 1 Recon Unit disavowed. He stared at the photo for a long moment. He had been younger then, leaner in the face, eyes colder, the kind of cold that didn't come from weather. Marcus laid the gear out across the kitchen table, moving with slow, measured intention. Gloves, optics, comms, GPS, a weather-sealed med pack, half-used but still viable. His sidearm, freshly cleaned, loaded with subsonic rounds. He did not speak, not until he reached into the smaller case and pulled out a worn leather wallet that held a single photograph. It was a print, old school, crease at the corners. Angela stood in the garden, grinning at him, arms muddy from replanting after a spring storm. She had hated that picture. He had kept it anyway. He held it in both hands, inhaled once through his nose and exhaled slowly. "I'm coming," he said. Not a promise. A fact. He folded the photo carefully, tucked it into the inside breast pocket of his vest, and began the mental checklist. Routes, intel, timing, surveillance, weak points. The soldier was awake now, and he would not sleep again until she was home. Night draped itself over the countryside like a veil of smoke, the last blush of twilight swallowed by clouds rolling in low and heavy. The air was damp with the smell of rain and dust, a tension hanging in the sky as though even the weather sensed something violent brewing beneath the surface. Marcus drove without headlights, his truck crawling along the edge of town like a predator skirting the edge of a herd. He had swapped the plates earlier that afternoon and covered the bed with a tarp. Nothing about his appearance matched the man who had delivered tomatoes that morning. His beard had been trimmed down to stubble, a bald cap shadowed his face, and the clothes he wore, muddy boots, tattered jacket, hands darkened with engine grease, fit the profile of someone you wouldn't notice. He parked 2 blocks off Main Street, away from the noise and light, and slipped through the back alleys with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked darker streets in worse parts of the world. Ahead, just off the main drag, sat a sagging bar whose neon sign buzzed and flickered like it had long given up trying to attract new customers. The Thirsty Horse Saloon had served the same people for decades. Men who knew each other's fathers, who didn't like outsiders, and who never asked questions if blood showed up in the gravel outside. Marcus found a shadowed corner across the street and waited, crouched beside a delivery truck, with its rear doors half open. The back entrance to the bar faced him directly. Music bled out to the warped screen door. Classic rock, distorted by years of cheap speakers and cheaper whiskey. He stayed still, watching as figures drifted in and out. Most came alone, a few in pairs. It wasn't until close to midnight that he saw what he had been waiting for. Brock stumbled out first, one hand on the doorframe as he cursed and barked a laugh into the humid air. Kyle followed, looking more sober but still dragging his feet, head down, eyes darting. They stood near the alley for a moment, sharing a cigarette, talking too loud about something they shouldn't have been. Marcus watched their body language, cataloged the slurs and threats that spilled from their mouths. Brock laughed about how she kicked like a mule and mimed holding someone down. Kyle winced, barely laughed, and kept glancing behind him like he knew something was off. They started walking together toward the lot behind the bar, likely to cut through to the street where they parked. Marcus waited until they passed, counted 4 steps, then moved. He crossed the alley in complete silence, every footfall placed with care. The gravel didn't betray him. The wind covered what little sound remained. As the pair rounded the corner of the bar into the tree-leaned footpath that curved behind the building, Marcus was already moving to intercept. They were laughing again, Brock waving his arms, mimicking Dake's threats. Kyle hung back, dragging his heels, distracted by something on his phone. Neither saw him coming. Brock didn't see the shadow move until it was already inside his space. There was no warning, no dramatic flourish, just a hard, deliberate grip on the back of his jacket, followed by a sharp twist and the sound of bone meeting bark as Marcus drove him sideways into the trunk of a gnarled oak. The block knocked the wind clean out of Brock's chest. He gasped, tried to turn, but Marcus moved with controlled precision, not allowing room for reaction. "What the dash?" Kyle started, his voice breaking, but it was too late. Marcus pivoted on his heel and sent the toe or his boot squarely into Kyle's midsection.